Hello there, everyone. Patricia here. Today we want to talk a little bit about what it means to grow the relationship with yourself. I talk a lot about building relationships here and all my content, and it's always outward, right? It's with, uh, for your career, with other people, socially, all of those things. But too often we miss the opportunity to look inward and what that relationship building effort looks like. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time doing that today. But before we get started, a couple of things, housekeeping. First, please make sure to hit the thumbs up and like this video and to subscribe so that it can get pushed out into the YouTube world and to share it with others who might be interested in this topic and this content as well. Okay, so let's see. Like I said, I talk a lot about building relationships. Because that's literally one of the things I do. I mean, it's what I had to do in my 25-plus year career as a lobbyist and working in the legislative arena. So there was always that focus about what the relationship looked like with someone or someone's office or another organization in the context of the issues that we were working on. And all along that way, there's always the issue of what does the relationship look like with yourself. But the problem is, no one's teaching us or talking about how to develop that relationship or what does it look like while you're spending all this energy, going outward. What does it look like to be inward? And most of the time, that doesn't happen until something, a crisis arises, something traumatic happens. There's something, even a crisis on the job or losing a job, whatever. Then that's when you start doing that inner, uh, hopefully, some of that inner work and reflection. A lot of times, that's also done again in a reactive mode versus a proactive mode. And so you're responding out of fear, out of anger, out of angst of some kind, and having to, take a quick look to say, what is it I want next for this outward thing? And rarely does that include taking a look inward just for you, unless it also involves your own health. These are my observations from not just others, but from my own self, right? Because even taking that look inward to talk about what it is you might want for your next job after something, happens or it's time to move on, it's still about you in the context of the work, not you in the context of you. And and that seems so simple, and yet it's really difficult to do because I grew up in the hustle culture. I lived for that stuff and was always going, going, going. And again, it's not until something more traumatic happens, loss of a job, loss of a loved one, health crisis, that you really take more of an inward look of like, well, wait, but what do I want out of this? Right? What do I want out of this? So let's take it because if you transition in a job, again, you're looking outward. What do you want so that you can be at the next level professionally for that? More so lately, not so much, times before, is there more of a look at what purpose you can live out in the work that you're doing and tying it in a little more closely to what your personal goals are. I see that a great deal in the younger generation who doesn't want to just go to a 9 to 5 just to go to a 9 to 5 and make a bunch of money and not do anything else. Now, am I saying that there aren't kids out there, like that? Of course there are, because there's always the glamour and but the bottom line is some folks are like, yeah, but I saw my parents or my grandparents stress out, not having control over their time, not having control over their life. not being there for me when I was growing up on certain things. And they're like, I don't want that. And there was a conflict in the workplace right before 2020 and the international health crisis, where that was coming to a head because what was happening is folks were calling these younger generation, these folks, some of them, calling them lazy because they didn't want to work. Well, I don't think it was because they were lazy because they didn't want to work. It was they don't want to work themselves to death. Like literally, they do not want to work themselves to death. They want to work with purpose. They want to for their work to mean something. They want for their time to mean something while they're doing that. And unfortunately, some of them coming to a quick realization that some of that doesn't necessarily jive when you're first starting out, but it can if you're conscientious about it, if you're deliberate about it. So when it comes to those of us in the workplace with more years of experience, not talking about Gen Z or even a younger millennial, but if you've been at the workforce a little bit and you're experiencing something and a transition of some sort, whether it's one you choose or one that you don't, it is much more likely that it's the transition you don't choose, the layoff, the firing, having to move because of a family matter or something like that, that causes us to take a look inward more about what it is I want, because you're kind of being forced into that, right? It's not just about the job, it's also about, well, if I'm going to have to engage in this transition time, what do I want out of it personally? And I know that I've experienced that several times now that I think about it, because of transitioning from, a high level, executive position to going out on my own. And then even after going out on my own, moving away from that primary work that I was doing before to more of the work that I do now. And even now, it's like, okay, what does this next level look like for me personally as well as with the work? And I can say that those transitions have definitely come with their ups and downs. Some of them were not so good or not so healthy situations that it was like having to say, yeah, I want the work and I want to do this, but I also need some self-respect. Not just self-respect, I need to be respected, right? So that's something that I want for myself. I want to work with purpose. I want for the work that I do to mean something a little bit faster, right? Because doing all that legislative work, sometimes the returns were not so quick, or sometimes the returns weren't there at all. So you have to kind of like bring it down to a more realistic. And for me, how I did that while I was working a 9 to 5 or whatever I was doing, I did it through volunteer work and community service and with my church. And so that's how I would get that purpose part out. But then when I started moving and working more for myself, and having to do the hustle and pulling in clients and all of that, yes, I was still doing that work, but I was having to be more mindful of it because the work wasn't being directed to me. I was creating it from within. So now I have more of an opportunity to align it, to the work, not just that I want to do for the world, but for myself and what my legacy might be. And those are some of the things can happen when you're transitioning for with a job, if for varying reasons, right? Somewhere in there you may gain a little more control over what it is you do, or being able to be a little more forceful about the direction that you take in the work that you do for whatever reason. And that is important to recognize that you actually do have that power. I also talk a lot about, being empowered in all that you do. And this is about being more empowered, like taking things into your own hands to direct your path more deliberately, and not just about the work, not just about the people out there, but about you ultimately and what it is that you want to do. One of the other areas where it comes up for sure is changes in family structure, right? The things that I used to do when I was single, no kids, changed dramatically when I'm working mom, married, and still trying to do all of the things. And I will admit that that led to burnout many times over. And that forced, and I'm getting a little bit into the health part, but the family dynamics and all of that, because that's a lot where we as women definitely will get lost in all of the things for the family. So you're working and you're doing all of the things, and then you've got the family and taking care of the house and whatever else, all of these other things, the second job, the third job, you know, second job raising kids, third job taking care of a household. It's a lot. And too often it's late by the time we realize what am I doing for myself? Because a lot of times, ladies, talking to you, it's not a lot. And that builds up resentment, that builds up angst, exhaustion, burnout, all of the things. And so that will force an inward look at some point in time, probably a couple of different times, about what it is. I remember one of the first times where that happened because I was used to, doing a lot with my hobbies and things like that. And I was a new mom. And I remember having a full blown meltdown. I remember having that full blown meltdown in the living room of one of our old houses. And my husband, saying at the time, calling one of my friends at the time of like, I need you guys to come get her. Like, go take her to go do something. And that was great, right? But even that gets lost down through the years because if you still return to the old patterns, then people get used to it and they start taking it for granted, which of course you resent. And it's just snowballs all over again. And so it's a matter of peeling back those layers to get back to, but where am I in all of this? And that can seem selfish. And guess what? It's okay. That's my whole other conversation when I'm talking about self care is not selfish, um, because you have to be able to take care of yourself if you really and truly want to be able to take care of other people long term, not just your kids, not just, with your spouse, you've got parents who are aging, all of that, but you got to, it starts with you. And part of that is setting boundaries. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but part of that is setting boundaries around yourself and your time and what you will and will not do so that there's something left for you to grow from and not just burn it down or just, let it wilt. Whichever analogy you want, right? Whichever analogy you want to use. But the point is that you don't want to be left with nothing, right? The third scenario that is uh, very common is when there's a health crisis for yourself, with someone else, particularly with yourself. I've been there as well. And it's like, what am I doing? How am I going to get past this? And literally, if you're in a health crisis for yourself, with yourself or someone else close to you, like you don't have any choice but to do that inner work. If you don't take a step and look inward about what it is you want and need for you moving forward, in this time and moving forward, it's going to take you out, and you don't want that, right? No one wants to be taken out by a health crisis. I've been there, for other people, most notably when my baby sister got breast cancer at a relatively, young age, and what that looked like, because that was all, she lived in another city, here, still in the state, but another city, and being on the road back and forth to manage her care with her close friends, and still recognizing I still needed to take care of my own family, and that by that point in time I was doing work for myself. So there were still these things, and it's like, okay, you gotta remember to, to take care of yourself during this time as well. And then fast forwarding to more recent years where I've had, health issues to arise, and it really interfering greatly with the work that I was doing because I spent so much time on camera. And, the chronic illness I had interfered with my ability to do that sometimes. And that would freak me out. And that would just make things worse because it was a stress induced illness, is a stress induced illness. And so I was just like, that is just not good. And so the time that I had to spend and am spending looking inward, saying, who am I now? Because who you are now is not who you were probably 5 and definitely not 10 years plus ago, but also who you are now and what you want moving forward. And that means most times shifting relationships, familiar relationships, friendships, uh, business or work. Like there are shifts in all of those things. And it requires you being deliberate about it and knowing that things just have to look different if you want to be able to grow from where you are today. If you want to grow to, live up to whatever legacy that you're looking forward to building and sustaining in your life. I'm not even talking about career, just in your life. Like, what's the legacy that's to be left? And that's a whole other frame of mind and thought process than when you're first starting out, right? Because you're like, yes, I want to be successful. I want to do all of this. And now I look back now. I was talking to someone the other day, and I look back now and I'm like, man, there was a lot of crap that I did back in the day because we forget about it. We don't give ourselves credit for it. And we don't slow down enough to recognize it. And so when I do and reflect on it, and it's like, yeah, and what have I learned from that? How have I grown as a result of those experiences? And recognizing that so much that I see today that people are like, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. And I'm like, I've already done that. I did that 5 years ago. I did that 10 years ago. And so those things are no longer relevant to me. And that is a crucial point of revelation and inner growth of when you realize that things that people may be pushing at you don't fit for you anymore, maybe haven't fit for you in quite some time. And that means it's time for you to move to another level. It's time for you to move in a new way and to shift your focus, not just on what you do, but to shift your focus on who you are. Oh my goodness, I love that. Let's say that again. Not just to shift the focus on what you do, but on who you are. And when you make that shift, I mean, it's like putting, y'all know how I am about my plants. That's one of my hobbies. When you start watering yourself and feeding yourself with the things that you actually need to grow for the next level of you, it's it's crazy good stuff. It is crazy good. And having been there a few times before and in that process again now, I can tell you that, yeah, there are definitely some challenging moments, definitely some challenging times, and there are some fantastic ones when you realize, all that stuff I did before matters because it laid a foundation for who I am now and where I'm moving to next, right? And it's not a bad thing to decide that something's not relevant to you anymore. It means you are growing. And when you start to focus on that and how you can grow more deliberately, that is really, really powerful. And so, a part of that process of being more deliberate about your inner growth and your personal growth is to do that reflection. You have to actively do it, not in reaction to something bad happening or to being scared or fearful, but like sitting down and just saying, you know what? Where am I right now? Where have I grown from? One of the things that I do, regular on a regular basis, whether it's annual, couple of years, whatever, I will literally sit down with some old journals. I have little business ones and personal ones, and I will flip through some of that, and I'm like, whoa. And then I'll flip through, and there are moments when I'm like, really? Am I still talking about that issue? Those I found a little frustrating, but it's a reminder that it may seem like the same issue, but is it really? Because it the same issue at a different level of you. It's a new layer, right? And I had to learn that because I was getting frustrated. There were certain things I was like, why am I dealing with the same problem over and over? And a dear, dear friend and mentor to me was like, well, maybe it's more like an onion with layers. You're going deeper into the layers and pulling off the layers, and not it's not because you didn't learn, quote, the lesson the first time. Once she told me that, I viewed these things in a completely different light, because that is like, oh, okay, wait, what is different about this layer that causes you to ask a different question, right? What is different about this layer, and what is it that I can learn moving forward, right? um, so the reflection time matters. Sharing and talking with other people who are in growth mode also, because here's the thing: if you share your growth, not just experiences, but vulnerabilities, right? Because sometimes you have to share some things that are a little more vulnerable in order to gain something, to get some new insight. But if you share it with someone who's not there, who only wants to see you for who you were as your old self, that's a no. So use a little discernment, right? This is not a conversation to have with any old person. It may or may not be a conversation you can have with, a bestie. It may or may not be a conversation you can have with a spouse. I don't know who that is for you, but you know who those people are that you can have that vulnerable, honest conversation, and know there's not going to be judgment. There's not going to be question like, well, why would you be trying to do that or think about that? Uh, you've got this going on over here. It may not. They may grow to that point later at some point, but everybody can't be there. So, share, have a conversation, but be mindful of who you share that with. I've learned that over the years as well, right? There are different people, and as I've gotten older with more experiences, different outlooks, like there literally are fewer and fewer people that I can share those things with, because the experiences they're not familiar with. And it's not to say that someone has to be familiar with the experiences, but they do have to have an open mind about who you are, as a person, and one who's growing, so that even if they don't know or share in the exact experience, they know you, and they're willing to support you in the next level of growth. That is really, really important. That is really important. And so then the next thing I think I would say, you've done some reflection, you've maybe had a chat or two with some close confidants, and then it's literally about, what am I going to do next, right? And I always recommend writing it down a different way. So journaling on the front end with the reflection is one thing, but on the back end with, well, here's where I want to grow to. Here's who I want to be next, and writing that down as opposed to letting that float around in your head is way more powerful, because it gives you something to look back on when you have those less than clear days, when you have those fuzzy moments 6 months from now, and you're like, what in the world am I doing and why? Having the ability to go back and look at what you said you wanted to do and how you wanted to do it, to be you at your next level, is so refreshing. It brings you back to center and to clarify. I'm like, yeah, I said this and this is still true. Or maybe there's a tiny shift, but let's make that shift, but this is still true at its core. And it's very, very helpful. And that's how I've done a lot of things as far as personal growth down through the years. I also read a lot. I've learned rarely are there things that are so new. It's much more about the concept is not new. Maybe it's the way it's applied that's new. So, if you're reading something from that perspective on personal growth, a lot of times we can get some fresh reflections and new insights. I love podcasts for that. Um, yeah, yes, some books, but being really specific about what it is I'm reading it for, right? When I was doing a creative process and working through that, it was a book that had sat on my shelf for years. I hadn't touched it, and then all of a sudden I did it, and it was just like this complete like opening and taking me to a whole other level. And so now I know to look for those types of things because where I am now is okay, what's going to challenge me creatively? What's going to challenge me at a thought leader level or something? What's going to challenge me to be more deliberate about my life experiences? And so that's what I'm talking about. When you're looking for things, don't just read something because, well, everybody says this is a great book to read. No, no, no. Read the stuff that applies to where you are right now and how that will help you grow. And I've had some fantastic reads, in recent years that were just so timely that I know for a fact, like several years prior, I would not have picked them up. I just wouldn't have, because they didn't fit for that time. But as I was growing, as I was experiencing some things and trying to move forward, these things were timely. These books were timely. These thought leaders were timely. And so I would follow, I would listen, I'd take, and then I have to put it out. It's like, what does this mean for me? Everything may not apply to you, but what does some of this mean to me? Right? And how can I apply it? What is it? I forgot who says this. One of the folks I follow, they say, take take what works for you, leave the rest behind. Don't go in trying to grab all the stuff and think it all has to apply to you. It doesn't, right? Save some of that energy, save that capacity for more of the stuff that really matters for you as opposed to stuff that doesn't apply to you right now, right? Okay? Okay. Oh my goodness. So many things, so many thoughts. I probably could go on a little bit more, but I think that's a great place to stop. And I want to encourage you to think about what does it look like for you to grow for yourself right now, and what does that mean? And what steps do you have to take right now in order to make that happen, to engage in it, to open yourself up to that? Um, and I'd love to hear what those things look like for you. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments, hit me up in the DMs. And do not forget to hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button so you can get more of this content coming to you on the regular. All right, take care. Talk to you tomorrow.